I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Perhaps one of the most difficult questions anyone can ask in the collapse-aware conversation and loosely knit global community is, how do we tell the truth to the children about what's actually going on? This is the conversation we'll be having with Ken Whitt today on the Poetry Predicament.
Hi.
Well, hi there. This is Dean Walker, and this is also the Poetry of Predicament podcast. Pleasure to have you here with us in the end of the first week in June in 2021. Remarkable year after a completely unique year in all of our experience of obviously a global pandemic. And it's important, I think, just at this moment to make mention that while in the extraordinarily privileged world of the USA and a couple of other countries, we have quite a few people are vaccinated and quite a few things are coming back to what one could call normal. And everywhere else in the world, that is not the case. And the vast majority of people are not vaccinated, and they will not be for quite some time to come. And then, there are different sub-facets of that issue, like how many people in the USA will, for one reason or another, not get themselves vaccinated willfully, and so on. So I just want to make notice of that. We're in gorgeous springtime here in Southern Oregon and perhaps other places where you are in the world. And there is still quite a bit going on that one could call disturbing, disrupting. There are, of course, many instances of the human goodness that we all just hopefully treasure those moments when we are exposed or we generate those moments of human goodness. And there are plenty of challenging other than kind moments from humans going on all around the world as well. And I've got the pleasure today of speaking with one person who's been here in the Poetry of Predicament a few times with me to speak about his own work and his own framing and experiencing of the world. And it's really always a pleasure to have Ken Whitt here to speak about those things exactly. That how he frames the world, how he sees the world, what his particular orientation is as a parent, as a faith leader in his community, as an author, as a thought leader, aside from or coupled with his faith leading. And for those of you who know me really well, that perhaps that seems ironic because I've not at all been a religious person. If anything, I've been very antagonistic toward religion. And yet, especially in these past more than 10 years now, when I've been very actively creating this body of work that includes the Poetry of Predicament podcast and Living Resilience, the website, and the body of work that's called Deep Academy, which is really to provide resources and support to the collapse-aware community. I've been finding time and time again some of the richest conversations that I get to have are with people who think and have a faith structure or a spiritual base that is somewhat different than my own. Ken is one of those people, and I think we met through roughly through some sort of indirect connection with Michael Dowd, whom I consider to be one of the really pioneers of bridging that gap between people like myself and the secular community who just, again, have a relatively antagonistic view with religion. And Michael has just done such an extraordinary job of resourcing us all by, I'll include link to Michael Dowd's work in the show notes. Just endless numbers of interviews and books that he's read into audiobook form, and on
Mm,
the list goes. It's outrageous. And I think that's where Ken and I overlap, is somewhere in the neighborhood of Michael Dowd's work. And I just, every time, Ken, you and I have had a chance to talk, I get another dose of really, I don't like using this word much, but it really seems appropriate here, of hope that there's a way for you and me to connect. And you and me meaning the general me and
yeah,
you, of people who, can be a bit distant on a spectrum, and we can find ways and places to overlap and to even collaborate. We're starting to nudge into a conversation, you and I, that might be worked on a little bit today in what we're talking about. And so I guess I should speak just a little bit more in just a moment about the what we're going to be talking about. But Ken, let me just get you on the screen and welcome you officially in here. And thank you again for spending time to talk about some stuff that's of mutual interest. And I hope it's of interest to the folks in the audience here of both podcasts. Many of you are obviously very used to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, um, but we also have the sister podcast of Take My Hand:
mm,
Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams. And I'm definitely going to post our conversation from today there, because today I believe we're going to bump into the conversation of how do you speak with children? How do you tell the truth to children about what's going on this planet? And so it's a steep gradient conversation, I think. It's already a tough enough conversation to be a parent and to be collapse aware. And then how do you do that? But then to get right to the center of it, how do you tell the truth to your children when obviously we're talking about age appropriate and context appropriate to our own family and so on. We'll get there, but that's the kind of conversation we're going to have with Ken Whitt today. So Ken, thanks so much for joining me again. And would you would you plug in anything about what you're up to that I didn't mention? Because I almost mentioned nothing at all about what you're up to. So
mm.
would you mind introducing a little bit about what you're up to and what you do?
Yeah, I was gonna say that uh, the audience, unless they've watched other podcasts, probably doesn't know anything about me. Um, uh, I have been a American Baptist pastor for 45 years, and retired 6 or 7 years ago, and created a spiritual formation ministry, where I have adopted the primary theme that unless someone has experienced unconditional love, that they cannot extend that love to anyone else, and that one of the most common experiences people have that interferes with knowing that they're beloved is uh, comes out of their religious experience, where their image of God is very much about conditions, and judgment, and even condemnation and exclusion and so on and so forth. Uh, and there's a lot of change afoot in the Christian world around those themes, but um, But I see myself as one of the people that's helping to move Christianity along on that. I mean, there's many others, Brian McLaren and David Gushy and Rob Bell, and there's a plethora of folks who are like learning to be followers of Jesus all over again, as if for the first time. And I count myself among that community. So I go back on a daily basis and read some part of the Gospels every day, and I keep finding every day new insight that gets me pondering. But during that quiet time, I also experience that love just holding me and sitting around within me, and then going forth from me. And so every day has its own unique way of being that love in the world. Uh, and I love my life here in retirement and all the opportunities to bless others, whether it be spending time fishing with my grandchildren or baking bread and delivering it to the neighbors. There's always a way to get up in the morning, remember that you're beloved unconditionally, that you're exactly the person you're supposed to be at that moment, and then passing that on through the day. I can't imagine the circumstance where it would be impossible to be a loving person sometime during the day. Yeah, another part, you might be grieving a loss, but once you pass through that and grown from that, then you're ready again to be love to others. And it just it makes me smile every time I think about starting out maybe feeling tired or bored or maybe struggling with hope, and then you bake some bread and deliver it to some people, and all of a sudden you're just having a great time. And I really believe that people can live that way even among dire circumstances. And of course, there's many stories about folk who have done that and found hope and sustainable lives and lots of love in terrible times.
Yeah. Well, you're taking us right up to the doorway of the conversation about being collapse aware, basically. And let me just take a moment to say my version of it. Perhaps you have something to change or add about it as well. When I use the word collapse aware, it's not just one type of person and with one point of view.
Mm.
It's quite a broad spectrum from on the one end, on the furthest end, you have people who are part of what is further called the near-term human extinction crowd. And that's the people who are pretty obviously at the extreme end of collapse awareness or an interpretation of what that means. And for me personally, it's at least my surface definition of collapse is that we are living in times of uh, human caused collapse of earth and human systems both, and that there is abundant evidence that we have been um, causing collapse of both earth and human systems for at least decades. And I'm specifically talking about the fossil fuel times. So really roughly the 20th century is its
Right.
most intense expression. And so we live in an extraordinarily different world and in human experience than certainly before that 100 years ago. And anything before 100 years ago, we certainly we had the roots of racism. We had the roots of domination of one culture over another, or domination over earth, extraction, and the negative aspects of capitalism and so on. But all of them have just intensified in such an extraordinary way as to give us the what is now quite casually called the sixth mass extinction that we humans are causing, and that we are doing nothing but intensifying as we speak.
Yeah.
So here we are, slightly different orientations to how we interact with people in our ministries, so to speak. So, it's interesting for me to think, am I doing a ministry? Is that what I do? I don't know. I'll have to give that some thought. In any case, we are both, it seems, doing our best to just offer something from our sincerest heart of hearts, if you will, to others, and hoping that that will be a benefit to them. Is that safe to say?
Well, let me try to summarize in just a couple sentences what I believe is the human predicament right now. First of all, there have been 100 plus global empires, civilizations, nation states since around the year 8000 BC that have risen and fallen. They all rise and fall with similar historical patterns and similar causes. One cause that civilizations always have when they collapse is that there's a widening gap between the rich and the poor.
Mhm.
Another is that there's a depletion of the resources needed for agriculture, like the loss of topsoil. All these situations that are historically repeated over 100 times are happening in Western industrial civilization today. So that's just simply, as sad as it is to say and as difficult it is to handle, that's the norm.
Mhm.
What's not normal is that at the same time, we're facing the collapse of the biosphere, which we've been contributing to for a long time, but far more rapidly in the industrial technological age for the past couple of 100 years, where we've essentially destroyed the source of life for everybody on the planet, including trees and bugs. And so there is a pile of predicaments that's created. Some people are just beginning to notice that the climate warming issue is not a hoax. They're beginning to say, yes, that's happening. The forest fires, the strange weather patterns and all that. Yeah, that must be real. But what they haven't begun to integrate is that that's simply one of the predicaments that are beginning to have intersecting consequences. So that the way I put it, mostly because I direct a lot of my efforts at my grandchildren and other children that I work with, my emphasis is that our kids are facing a future of perils, and those perils are legion, and they will be step by step, and maybe some big steps, living in a very, very different world. And that this is not a hopeless situation by any means. There are ways to help our grandkids and our progeny live well, no matter what the circumstances. And those preparations include spiritual resilience, knowing that hope is sustainable, that we can be loving no matter what. They include building smaller communities of people who can back each other up and pull together. And third, teaching children that they can learn what they need to learn as they're going along, that they can adapt and learn new skills. And so what I have done in my book, God is Just Love, building sustainable communities, spiritual resilience for the sake of our children and the creation. What I've done is begin to outline what that would look like, and then and it very much in story form. And then as the book has come out and I finished my author's draft, beginning to design the kinds of events where children and families would come together in a retreat setting to learn spiritual resilience, to grow in community, and to begin to learn adaptation skills. So if you were to come to our place right now where people can actually finally get together again, there is a large collection of ongoing projects that are all about teaching adaptation skills that will help people know that they can adapt, which is one of the ways that people stop being so scared. They know that they aren't just victims of what's going on around them, but they can learn and grow and change. So yesterday and Saturday, I was teaching teenagers and older children an introduction to archery classes, because archery is and using a bow and arrow is one of the adaptation skills that would help people feel like, well, they aren't paralyzed. They can learn to do things. And if I have my way about this, within about 2 years, we'll be making bow and arrow out of materials from the woods around the house. And I don't expect to ever become like really good at it, because I got lots of other things I want to do. But I expect to become good enough at it that I can show people the basics, and then they can find the adaptation skills that they'd like to work on. It's really fun. I live each day with so much of a sense of purpose.
Yeah. You know, it's thank you for that. I'm starting to get a sense of some of the activities and some of the skills that you're offering in what you're calling efforts at adaptation. I'd like to just share a little bit about the work that I'm putting together and see if you have a similar segment of your work that you're offering.
Yeah.
And it basically, I start out assuming that there are two different groups of people that I'm addressing in the work that I'm doing through Living Resilience Deep Academy. And one of them is the people who are almost brand new to the idea of a collapse-aware reality. Like
Mm-hmm.
they might have seen temperatures change in their area or big dramatic weather events that they just can't ignore anymore. Or there's something in their gut that just tells them things are not looking good, in terms of the human structures, the economy or whatever, or the earth systems, the weather and the soil conditions that you're mentioning and so on. So the people who are new to the conversation, and then the other group that I often get to interact with is people who've really been around this conversation for a long time. And I start with the most basic skills possible in terms of resilience skills, and that would be self-regulation and co-regulation skills.
Right.
The skills of being able to bring ourselves back to center, where if I'm with my family and I live in Houston, for instance, and we've just had this deluge that's flooded our city and our neighborhood, and we're sleeping with 50 other families in the local high school gym. That's knocks a whole community off their center, knocks them out of their normal state of being that they would call, more or less able to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors. That gets crushed pretty easily. Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. So, when nature punches us in the face or something happens to knock us off center, we definitely need the skills to come back to center, both individually and collectively. And what I'm finding is that very few people are lucky enough to have a family where they taught those skills amongst each other, or in a neighborhood where that's so. It's usually learning after the fact, or first aid level self-regulation and co-regulation. And so that's, that's a substantial part of the introductory levels of my work. And I'm curious, do you include that kind of stuff in what you're
Yeah.
describing?
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine that someone could go through what happened to thousands of families in Texas. And it basically happened because of the climate changes in the polar region, which changed the jet stream so that it dipped down and brought all that cold weather. And it was a total impossibility some years ago. I mean, things like that just didn't happen. But it's the changes in the jet stream caused by the melting of the polar ice. And last summer, I think it was just last summer, the jet stream brought 105-degree temperatures above the Arctic Circle in Siberia.
Right.
And they had forest fires. So anything like that can happen. Okay, it's hard for me to imagine a family going through that in Texas and not coming out of it wanting to find out how that happened and whether they could be better prepared for it the next time. So, but many people are simply, like with COVID, longing to go back to normal. And so they don't do that, and they're really busy, and their lives are stressful. So they don't do that work. Within the next year or so, we have 2 steps to take before we will be completely ready to handle any kind of emergency of that kind, short term, and bring other people under our umbrella. And there will be a whole part of our house, the whole bottom floor of our house will become emergency and guest housing. And we will have all the basic resources on hand for handling a short-term situation. The 2 steps we still have to take are a secondary water system, which we will probably build with rainwater runoff from the roofs of our garage and our house, and a very simple design for a complete indoor bathroom facility that uses really low technology, and I call them sawdust toilets. And I don't need to go into the details, because if you go online, you can learn about it yourself. Just Google sawdust toilets. Go to Pinterest and you'll see hundreds of designs. You can buy them, you can make them. But we will have all of that in place. And we may never use those resources for that, but they will be there as teaching tools. One of the things my wife and I figured out shortly before I wrote the final chapter of the book, was that, by and large, people do not want you to talk very much about what's happening in the world. However, if they come to your house and see you making topsoil or installing a sawdust toilet or putting in a secondary water system or canning your own food and having an organic garden, when 2 years ago, my wife and I knew nothing about these skills. Okay, but we now have these skills and are growing. It takes a certain amount of lead time to learn them. And then they say, why are you doing that? Or tell me about that. Or how would I learn to do that? And then you get to talk because they ask you. And your lifestyle and the way you love people, like now we're baking bread in an outdoor antique wood-fired cooking stove. And we go around and we deliver the bread to our neighbors. I meet every new family that comes into our area. And oh yeah, we bake this bread in our outdoor oven. You have an outdoor cooking stove that's fired with wood. Why do you have that? And it creates opportunities to build relationships and build community. And most people just, their greatest longing is to belong and to love. So you invite people to belong and to know that they're loved by the things that you do. So yeah. I guess that's enough of an answer.
I I still want to hang out in that zone if we can,
Sure.
because it seems like we're just on the edge of that conversation of how to speak the truth to children.
Yep.
And then what I was hoping that I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm hoping we can also talk a little bit about how we talk with each other as allegedly adults in this world. And um, what I'm finding is that a quick scan of much of the USA, and I'm sure it's elsewhere in the world, but USA is a bold example of so much polarization and so little, just uh, willingness to speak about uncomfortable topics with one another is just not very popular these days.
Yeah.
So we seem to be uh, very poorly collectively. We seem very poorly equipped to tell the truth with each other, much less to our children. So it's one thing to be offering some skills, which I love that you're doing that. It's really inspiring, and I look forward to tracking your progress in this incredible project. And I just want to land in this particular area for a while because it seems like it is at the heart of what is ailing us. We
Yeah.
seem to have very little ability to just speak the truth. And I guess I'll qualify what I would say the truth is that I'm interested in us talking about a bit. I know we're both very familiar with this. Is what Michael Dowd makes an incredible point in all of his work about is there have been voices now for decades that have been crystal clear. There's just no way they could be any more clear that we are on an extraordinarily destructive path, and it is accelerating and intensifying very regularly with books like William Catton's Overshoot. And there are dozens of books that are that
Yeah.
clear
Some
and
of us began to
unflinching.
pay attention to Rachel Carson's
Right.
spring book, and then the Club of Rome's Limit to Growth. And those
Exactly.
things hit me over the head way back when,
Yeah.
and I guess started opening me. Yeah. And Caton's book, Overshoot, is a
Right.
critical resource.
So what what it appears to me to be right now is there are tiny, tiny pockets like what I do, what you're doing, what Michael's doing, and I am not a parent myself, but I've been involved with parenting training programs for decades, and so I've done quite a bit of proxy parenting, and it's always been a concern for me, like what a tough job it is anyway, just to be a parent, but then to be a collapse aware parent in a world that is literally insane now.
Yeah.
We have no shared baseline of even the most essential levels of sanity. And again, primarily in the USA, where it's just so obvious. And so I'm curious, how do we speak to one another? How do we create a more open channel of communication, first between the adults
Right.
in the room, and then open them up in an age appropriate way to the children? You have to have given some pretty serious thought to this. Do you have anything that you can add?
Oh wow! I mean, it's a huge topic, and it's an extremely good one. First of all, I want to honor the fact that as I've listened to poetry of predicament and other broadcasts that you've done, I've often seen a mom and a daughter on
Mhm.
the program talking about these things. And one of the things I almost always notice is that in their sense of maturity and well-being, a lot of the children are way ahead of the parents. I mean, the parents are still struggling because it's so painful, but the kids are like determined. Maybe they have some optimism, but kids can handle a lot. And so I could tell you some really good stories about how my grandchildren and I have experienced all of that. But I want to start with the opening words of my 11th chapter of my book, God is Just Love. Is a quote from the Bible, from the Hebrew Bible, Psalm 78. And it says, "O my people, hear my teaching, listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth telling stories. I will utter dark and hidden things from of old, told to us by our mothers and fathers. We will not hide these things from our children. We will tell them the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, the power of God, and the wonders God has done." And so some of the truths we have to tell our kids are awesome truths about people like Rachel Carson and William Caton and others who have come before us. And I'm thinking of so many others like Brian Swim and Thomas Berry and others who've been telling us really and doing really good things. And it would seem that it would be easier to tell our children the good news than the bad news, but I sometimes experience it's the opposite, because so many adults don't have that good news integrated deep into their being. So they speak with their kids and live with their children out of a place of fear more than a place of hope. And so adults have to do what you were just saying. Adults have to find the community and the hope for themselves before they can possibly help their children find it. So that takes a first of all, something that resembles some kind of spiritual journey. And I've heard so many podcasts and presentations by people like Jem Bandel, who's a major player internationally in all of this. And one of the things Jem says is that as soon as he figured out how bad it was, he knew that he wouldn't be able to take another step until he found a deep source, a deep reservoir of hope that would sustain him. So he began his own spiritual journey, not guided by a religion or like a church or a synagogue or a mosque, guided by spiritual mentors who helped him learn to pray, meditate, however you want to refer to all of that. So the first thing adults have to do is learn the spiritual resources that are required to know the truth and to not fall apart when you know it. And those resources are available. They're widely available. But we're all on different. We're all on a materialistic journey instead, and consuming more and so forth, and we're stuck.
Right. And I'd like to just pause you there, because you're mentioning Jem Bandel and his personal process of kind of setting up a baseline, a foundation in his own experience so that he could move forward in some kind of way rather than just being in despair of.
Yeah, and I know you've done the same process, even though you were contrary to institutionalized religion. Right. You found a path on which sustains your spirit.
Right. I guess I'd like to just pause for a moment to say again, I believe that we're talking about a spectrum, not that I think Jem's landing place is likely quite different than my own, which might be different than yours, and so on. And I just speak for a moment that where I have landed, and this is actually since I was about 9 years old watching Jacques Cousteau, I saw quite clearly, indirectly, what he was saying was that humanity is going to kill these oceans. It was quite clear to me. He never said that at that scale, but I heard that, and I took that on, and I've been um, doing my own lifelong research into validating that, and indeed it's been true and continues to be true. So I have landed in a place where, in my version of collapse aware, means that we are heading to a place where we will have immense human life loss within my old guy lifetime. We will
even with
have,
our lifetime.
and we have already caused 2/3 of the wild animal biomass on the planet to be gone, and so on. You know, you and I could both list the laundry list of various levels of
Right.
extinction level predicament that we've created and living in. And so, you know, for me, again, I'm in no way interested in convincing anyone to take my stance. You know, this is something we all must find for ourselves and validate for ourselves. But for me, it's not just that our way of doing the global economy, for instance, is going to do bad things in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years and so on, but it's actually the cause, the proximal cause of what the predicament we're all in. And so if I were a parent right now, one of the most difficult conversations I could have is, where does one find hope? How does one define hope when I, as this imagined parent, I know that my child will not have the same access to possibility, just sheer amount of possibility as I do, as I have, as we all call normal up till now. We've hit a threshold where that is no longer the case. That isn't to say that there won't be any possibility, there won't be any meaning, there won't be any beauty and so on at all. That is, not what I'm saying. But in terms of all of us who have been growing up in saturated in this business as usual model, and part of that is next generation will have it better than we did, and the next
Yeah.
one will have it
Right.
better still. And all of that based on a model of infinite growth on a finite planet. These are deep lies. They're no longer possible in the
Hmm.
form, certainly not in the form I was saturated in and we were all saturated in growing up. How do we speak these realities to an age appropriate child? And how do we um, position those realities in ourselves so that you and I, as the adults in the room, can speak to each other first before we
Right.
turn to face the children?
Right. Yeah, I just have to tell a story at this point. I have lots of stories about how I've been with children or part of their experiences of becoming more spiritually resilient or growing closer in community or learning skills. But here's one that's a specific answer to your question. I am totally convinced that our children need to grow up with a different understanding about death and loss and everything. That they need to understand. They need to grow up understanding the incredible uh, pattern of the entire universe, that things die in order for other things to live, and that even destruction is the only way for construction to happen. A star explodes and it creates the building blocks of life, like carbon, but the stars have to explode like 3 times over billions of years in order to make the element that is carbon. And that a planet like the Earth, I sorry to say to the folks in Goma, Africa, who are dealing with it right now, but the volcanoes have to explode and release heat, which creates eventually the the environment where life can begin and thrive. So how children understand death and their capacity to experience it and talk about it as simply the way it is, and not something that we hide like in the American way of death. So a lot of these opportunities arise spontaneously. So I had made this cutting board to take to my daughter's house. It was made with live edge black walnut. And while I was wrapping it up to take to them as a gift, part of the bark fell off, and there were all these dead worms under the bark. And they had been crawling, making these little pretty lines in the live edge of the it was black walnut cutting board. So I taped the bark back on, took it to the kids, and I said, before we go on our walk, I have something to share with you. And I showed them the cutting board, and I took the bark off, and I said, look at this. Look at these dead worms. They're just dead worms. They're dead. They're not valuable. They don't matter. And I said, that's not true. You know, they do matter, because what were those dead worms doing? Well, they were taking that black walnut tree and they were turning it back into soil so that a new tree could grow. So every time you see worms and bugs and such eating up a dead tree in the forest, they're part of the cycle that takes that which is dead and makes it into life again. So we went on our hike in the park, and now we're talking about, at that time, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7 and an 8-year-old. So there's 5 kids from 4 to 8. We go for this walk in the woods, and it was exhausting, because every time one of the kids found a dead tree with worms and grubs and ants and everything crawling through it, they would call, "Grandpa, Grandpa, I found another one." And what might be seen as a scary story became a dramatic, repeated lesson that things die in order that others might live. And death is not a bad thing. Death is not something we fear. Death is, and of course, if you have a perspective that there is some kind of part of our consciousness that lived before we were born and that lives afterwards, it becomes a little easier to put that into the storyline when you're talking with kids. If you don't believe it, you gotta work that out in a different way. But for me, I said, in order for us to get closer to God, eventually we die, and then the part of us that we call the soul or our consciousness continues on. And I actually really do believe that. And it's one of the factors that makes me not look at death as such a fearsome prospect. But another way to put that is that the universe is just chock full of energy that we call love. And that energy just keeps on keeping on. It's like some kind of gigantic Energizer bunny. It just keeps keeping on, and love can't be defeated. Yeah, okay, so a couple countries go to war, or there's a pandemic and people do stupid things to the earth, but love doesn't keep passing on through every situation. And as long as we're alive on this earth, there will be a way for us to be loving. And so there's nothing to be terrified by. And of course, that doesn't work itself out like some kind of picnic. I mean, it's not. We're not playing games here. The suffering is real, and yet, when we get up in the morning, no matter what the bad circumstances, and find a way to be loving to someone else, we give them the gift of life that they didn't have until we were loving towards them, and then love lifted up them. And it's always possible to live that way. That's where the hope is coming from. Love never gives up, and it never is defeated. And death, it does not ever have the last word. Those are concepts that that adults have to, first of all, get into their gut, so they don't live by terror, but they live by love.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. There's
Can be passed on to kids.
uh-huh. There's a lot of overlap in the words you're using and what you're describing to other wisdom traditions, both that I'm familiar with from my own practices and insight, and then from others. And one thing that really stuck out is that what it seems like you're orienting the children to do in this imagined conversation, and what you're imagining, what you're also saying that you and I might do as the adults in the room before we turn to speak with them, is you're inviting us to have a very as present in the moment, an orientation for our attention as possible. Is that part of what
Yes.
I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. Yeah. We live in the because it's only in the moment that we can experience and be love to others.
Mhm.
If you anticipate, how am I going to be loved or overcome suffering 2 years in the future if this happens?
Mhm.
Nobody can figure that out. It's so, even though we can see some patterns that are evolving and some suffering like hunger or pandemic that are on their way or that are already present, um, you can't really discover that the love is available to get through that until you get there. So it's living in the moment, and the moment is all that matters at that particular juncture.
Yeah.
Although sometimes, if you have a fire extinguisher nearby, preparation, it's going to be a lot easier to put out the fire than if you don't. So preparation and awareness of how to uh, see reality in such a deep way that you can have some idea about how to get ready for
Yeah.
what's next, and you can get your kids ready for what's next. And so we live in a time where electrical power and the electrical grid are pretty fragile. It's really worse in Puerto Rico and lots of other places than it is here. We know that topsoil is depleted, so why don't you make some and be on the side of sustainability instead of the side of destruction. And that I don't know. I just have fun doing that.
Yeah.
Topsoil is one of my favorite projects.
Well, Ken, I get two things. One, I'm noticing that our time is starting to draw to a close here, and I'm also I'm curious if it's seems like it's a bit easier for me to get my head around sort of the pragmatic, the pieces that you're talking about, like having a fire extinguisher ready for possibility of fire, or learning how to do these more survivalist or pragmatic skills that we might need to know something about if electricity weren't as available and so on. Any aspect of collapse comes down, we're going to need some new skills. So I do get that. I'm wondering if you could wrap it up for us today with anything that you could share with us about the inner skills that you're present to. What are the inner skills that are called for, that a person who's pretty new to this conversation, that they could, I mean, I'm going to make I'm a pretty good shameless promoter. I'm happy to put all the information about how to get a hold of your book and so on in the show notes here. But in terms of the inner skills, do you have anything to offer as some of the first steps of really getting more of an orientation to the moment, more of the orientation toward the consistency of what I'm hearing you say is love, as opposed to the separation and the fear that seems to be so in default mode everywhere these days. How,
Yeah,
what are some of those inner skills that you could mention
uh,
for that new
uh,
person?
I'll make this extremely simple, although achieving it or being it is much more difficult. I talk about a lot of possibilities in my book. There's a whole section about how to get there from where you are. But there is no way forward in difficult times. There is no way to mature in any time without some kind of spiritual practice like meditation, prayer, centering.
Mm,
It doesn't really matter. I mean, there's so many yoga. I don't care how you do it, but you get to this place which puts you in touch with what reality is really all about, which I believe is just love. It's just all around us, and the moment you get yourself to that quiet, centered place where you just know your love, then when you come out of it, it changes the way you relate to everything going on around you. It helps you move from decision making that is grounded in fear to decision making that's grounded in love. And I don't know that there's any. I don't think you can get there. Uh, I, I, you can't get there. I mean, I don't like to be like this is an absolute truth. I definitely know that there's many ways to get there, many spiritual practices, many traditions, uh, and they're out there all over the place. And so what I try to tell people in my book and always is start somewhere. You know, watch a movie that is on a spiritual theme. Read a book. Go on a retreat. For most people, the fastest and most consistent way to stay centered, to get back to your center, is simply to spend time in the creation. And I'd say that's the most common way that works for people, even without a disciplined spiritual practice. Just go be in the creation. It is there for you. And it's a healing and a loving presence. Just go out in the creation. Take a long walk in the woods where no one else is around. Go sit in the woods. I mean, walk among the big trees. Walk on the ocean. Walk along the ocean. Um, that I hear from more people is how they find that center again when they've been knocked off. But uh, but that is a spiritual practice.
mhm.
And fishing, my brother and I went fishing this morning and just sat out there. He caught 4 fish. I caught nothing except a wonderful good time. I didn't care. He caught all the fish. And oh wow! I mean, it's just the quiet of the morning. There were no noises on the
Mhm.
lake, and anything. Just slow the process down and head toward the center. And there are many, many, many resources out there. And get yourself into relationships which support that, and get yourself far, far away from religions or relationships that put you down. Just get away from them. If they aren't affirming that love, get away from them. Get those people out of your life. Find a way to get close to the creation and the creator, and and you will find all the sustaining love you could ever need.
Yeah. Yeah. Ken Whitt, always good to talk with you, and
You
really
too.
good to hear about your literally your home project that is sounds like it's really coming into form where people can actually start to show up and you can use
Yeah,
this stuff
yeah.
that you've been working on so hard. So you combine that with the wisdom that you're sharing in your book and in conversations like this, it sounds like you are really an immense contribution to the people that
You
you
know,
get to
Dean,
be
I
around.
really, I really would affirm also. We put out a weekly newsletter,
Mhm.
and it covers a lot of territory. I just did a 4-part series on getting rid of the transactional world, transactional religion, transactional relationships, transactional
Mhm.
economics. Just find a way to walk a little bit away from any of those, and find yourself in a world which is generative and generous,
Mhm.
and find yourself in relationships and with a faith stance that are that support that. But all you have to do to find that is go godisjustlove.com. Try to make it simple. Godisjustlove.com.
Well, be sure to put all those things. Ooh, I've got the sound thing going on a second here. Let me just see if I can talk enough that it will stop. Good. Okay. So I'll be sure to put all those pieces into the show notes so people can get a hold of you and many resources that you're talking about. And I really appreciate you staying with me on this conversation, especially, kind of continuing to press into that place where how will we formulate how we speak with ourselves about this, with each other as adults about this, and then with children about this. And it seems like we've covered some really important, good ground.
Yeah.
Again, always good to talk with you, Ken. So,
And fortunately, there are a lot of people out there, Dean. I mean, not a superabundance, but there are a lot of people out there who are doing very, very good work. And you among them, of course, Joanna Macy, so many, Michael Dowd, so many people that are putting out videos and so forth. It's not that hard to get rolling.
all right. All right. Well, look forward to our next time.
Yep.
There's that wait, there's blah, blah, blah. I'm making noise to try and diffuse the grumbly sound that happens until, like now, there's no more feedback going on. So, so Ken, thank you again. Great to spend time. I look forward to our next conversation
too,
and
Dean.
possibly
real
for that eventual collaboration of some kind. I look forward to possibly
Be great. Okay.
something like that out.
Have a good one.
Alrighty.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.